Hello. In today's podcast, we're talking about a man who saw himself as an artist, but has gone down as one of the great monsters in history. A politician, a populist, and a performer. But enough of Tom Holland. Let's talk about us.
Dominic, so predictable.
Yeah, but so satisfying.
Yes, so satisfying. I suppose.
I mean, what you have in Nero is the man who played Nero for me most compellingly was Christopher Biggins. And I think he would do a brilliant Tom Holland.
Well, I'm a bit thinner than Christopher Biggins.
You are. You'd have to lose a bit of weight. Anyway, so Tom, Nero, I mean, this is a gift to you. This is one of the great characters.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to you for allowing us to do this.
In all history. I mean, he really is one of the absolute emblematic characters. Children have heard of Nero. He is the paradigmatic, sort of depraved, corrupt, evil Roman emperor. He is, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And yet, to me, what's fascinating about him, I don't know how far you go along with this, is that he, like all characters in history, has now been revised. And now historians say, well, maybe Nero has been traduced by the sources. Maybe Nero is actually a jolly good fellow who's been maligned by Suetonius and Tacitus and these other sort of snobby, elitist historians. What do you think?
Well, I've actually just come back from looking at a new exhibition that's opening at the British Museum on Nero. And it's very good. All kinds of fantastic stuff, wonderful detail, beautifully laid out, highly recommended. But you're right. This is the theme of it is essentially that Nero wasn't as bad as people made him out to be.
Right.
And I guess the argument for Nero not having been as bad as people say is that you've got to look at the people who wrote about him. And there were basically two groups of people who wrote about him. The first group were senators, elite members of the upper classes, who Nero pretty systematically trampled on an awful lot of what they held sacred. Yeah. And so in a sense, it was inevitable that they were not going to like him.
They're sort of Remainers writing the life of Boris Johnson. Is that basically what the story is?
Yeah, it's the New York Times on Trump, perhaps.
Right, yeah.
We don't have the equivalent of Fox News. Would perhaps be the analogy. And the other group of people, of course, are Christians.
Right.
Nero is the beast.
But they must be writing much later, I suppose, are they?
Well, the Book of Revelation, which portrays Nero as one of the two beasts. Right. And essentially the portrait that the Book of Revelation gives of Rome as the whore of Babylon, as this great sump of depravity and wealth and horror. That's a portrayal of Nero's Rome. And it's because Nero puts to death large numbers of Christians after the fire and accuses them of having started this Great Fire of London.
Great Fire of London?
What am I saying? Great Fire of Rome.
That's massive beyond even Nero's powers.
Of course, that was the French, wasn't it?
yeah, of course. All right. Well, I think you should give us a sort of 2-minute overview of Nero's life and reign for those people who are not as familiar with the early days of the Roman Empire as you are. So he's what, the fourth emperor? Is he?
He's the fifth emperor.
Fifth emperor. So we've had Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius.
Yeah, Nero is the great-great-grandson of Augustus, the first emperor who's planted an autocracy amid the rubble of what had been Rome's traditional republican system. So Nero's line of descent from Augustus is absolutely crucial to his status. He has the blood of a god because Augustus has been deified in his veins. He has been adopted by Claudius, the previous emperor, as his son. And in Rome, to be adopted essentially means you become his son. Claudius has married Nero's mother, who is also his niece, because Claudius is not descended from Augustus. Agrippina, his niece and wife, is. And so that's the kind of crucial channel. Nero comes to power at the age of 16. He's very much under the thumb of his mother, Agrippina, and of his tutor, Seneca, high-ranking intellectual, but also incredibly wealthy and influential.
So he's a Stoic, isn't he? Is he a
Stoic? He's a Stoic, yes. So for the first years of his period in power, Nero is under their thumb, and people kind of look back on this as being a period where he ruled quite well. But increasingly, he gets fed up with Seneca, but also particularly with his mother, and he ends up doing what any pissed off teenager would do with his mother. He ends up having her murdered.
As you would.
And from that point on, essentially, Nero literally takes the stage. He uses Rome and the Roman Empire as a kind of stage for his incredibly potent, alarming, menacing, artistic temperament. But he also literally takes to the stage.
I wish the listeners could see this, because you're sort of writhing with enthusiasm,
with excitement, and enthusiasm. Well, I really think he's astonishing, because he clearly does have this kind of incredible artistic sensibility, and because he has all these incredible resources, he's able to make it manifest in a way that probably no one else in the entire history of art has ever managed to do.
He reminds me of, is it James Franco, that American sort of actor, director who makes terrible films and is always really being indulged by the sort of New York critics and stuff? Isn't he a bit like that?
No, because I think he's actually quite good. And he's also, he's not a kind of art house. He's hugely populist. And that's precisely why he kind of gets resented by the elite.
He's Tom Cruise.
Well, Dominic, you'd like him. I mean, he's against the sneery metropolitan Remainer elites, and he's one for the people. Right. He's like you.
Is he?
Yeah.
I never thought of myself as like Nero. I always thought of myself as Trajan.
So essentially, just to continue very, very, very quickly through the run of his life. Yeah. He is essentially very popular with the masses, very unpopular with the elites. Things are snarled up for him. In AD 64, when about 2/3 of Rome gets incinerated in a fire.
Yes.
Nero deals with this quite effectively. Lots of poor relief. He puts people up in kind of shanty towns in public places. Starts a huge rebuilding program, rebuilds much of Rome in a much better way, but aggressively appropriates quite a large chunk of it for his own estate, what comes to be called the Golden House. Also commissions a giant statue of the sun, which will go up and give its name to the Colosseum in due course. He then goes on a tour of Greece. While he's in Greece, news comes through that conspirators are moving against him. He comes back. Conspirators move, everything falls to pieces. He flees Rome, takes refuge in an out of town villa. The Senate proclaim him a public enemy. He commits suicide here when he hears the horse beats of Praetorians coming to arrest him. Commits suicide. His reputation is blackened by subsequent generations, but there are very clearly traditions as well which commemorate him in a much more positive light. Because basically it's the senatorial elite and then the Christians who write the history, it's the black reputation that wins out.
Wow. Okay. So that's a great overview. Let me rewind right to the beginning, the thing that slightly puzzles me about this story. So Nero is 16. He's never held, he's never wielded political authority. He hasn't been in the army. He's not a soldier. The Republic is not that long ago. And Rome has had, obviously, Augustus, who was the sort of autocrat who created the Roman Empire. It had Tiberius, who'd been a commander. And then it had Caligula, who was a disaster. Claudius, not much of an anything. Why is it that the idea of the sort of next person in line in the family taking power, how has that become ingrained so quickly that the Senate and all the military commanders and all these other people just automatically think, oh yeah, well, Nero will make a great emperor, let's have him? I mean, why doesn't somebody more, experienced or more powerful take over instead of Nero when Claudius dies?
Because Nero has the blood of Augustus in his veins, and there is a sense that an heir of Augustus should rule.
Right.
And one of the things that complicates this is that Claudius is actually a usurper. So when Caligula gets murdered, and Caligula is descended from Augustus, so in that sense he's seen as legitimate, there is actually a move on the part of the Senate to get rid of the principate, the rule by the princeps, the first man, or perhaps to appoint someone as emperor who is not descended from Augustus. But Claudius, who has been brought up in the Augustan house, he is the grandson of Livia, who has married to Augustus, and who viewers of I Claudius will remember is kind of cast as the murderous matriarch. So Claudius kind of rushes off and grabs the Praetorian Guard, who are the kind of the military presence in Rome. He basically bribes them to support him, and then there's nothing that the Senate can do. And the people want an emperor, but essentially because the emperor guarantees them bread and circuses.
Right.
This is the famous comment by Juvenal, writing a few decades later. But essentially it does sum it up. The role of the emperor is to ensure that this vast teeming city of 1 million people gets fed. And they're able to do that because they have control of Egypt, the breadbasket of the Mediterranean world and of North Africa. And Claudius and then Nero build a massive deep sea port in the mouth of the Tiber at Ostia. And they build huge granaries that line the 16 miles of the River Tiber from Ostia up to central Rome. And they essentially ensure that people don't starve. And that's the basis of, so the Praetorians, the bread ration, and then the ability of emperors to entertain the masses as well. And there are huge numbers of entertainments.
Yeah.
All of these things mean that, the rule of the Caesars is vastly more popular than having a load of, virtue signaling senators doing it.
Okay, but so has Nero been trained for this? I mean, has he, 16 years old, has anybody, so he's not Claudius. Claudius has a son, Britannicus, right? Now, how come Britannicus, I know Britannicus is younger, but how come people don't say, well, Britannicus is obviously, he may be younger, but is it because Nero's mum, and here I may be either betraying my own sort of prejudice or the influence of the sources. Is it because Nero's mum, Agrippina, is this sort of Lady Macbeth figure who has prepared the ground for her son, or is it that just Nero is older or more talented? Or
Agrippina is the daughter of Germanicus, who is the kind of the great lost hero, the great lost idol of the Roman people, a dashing general who dies early in the reign of Tiberius, and it's widely thought that he's been murdered, and he's commemorated as the kind of the sweetheart of the Roman masses, this man of great charisma and potential.
Yeah.
Agrippina is his daughter,
she's Caligula's sister.
And Caligula's sister, yeah. And she's been exiled by Caligula for being part of a conspiracy against him, gets brought back under Claudius, who marries her. Because she has this blood relationship to Germanicus, she's cherished by the Roman people, but she's also more saliently cherished by the Roman army, by the military. And so that makes her a very potent player in her own right. Women are not supposed to exercise political power in Rome, but Agrippina is a significant player. And she is able to provide Claudius, who is quite elderly, with because her son is that much older than Britannicus, Claudius's son by a previous wife. Nero essentially kind of provides a guarantee that if Claudius dies, there'll be someone old enough to step into his shoes.
But isn't Claudius smart enough to see that poses a threat to his own son? I mean, you would think that.
Well, that's very much the sense you get from I Claudius. But I think that Claudius adopts Nero, and so Nero therefore becomes his son.
That's strange.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem strange, but Claudius is anxious to establish the succession.
Yeah,
and that's why he's married Agrippina. Now, the brilliant thing about the way that this gets presented is that subsequent historians, of whom Suetonius, the biographer, is by far the biggest bitch.
Yeah.
He absolutely. So he reports that Nero was always going to turn out bad, both because Agrippina is a kind of terrible shrew and harridan. Yeah. She's a woman who wants to exercise power, so of course she's monstrous. I mean, what could be more appalling than that? But also because Nero's father, who is a descendant of the Henobarbi kind of ancient family, is absolutely an appalling man, and Suetonius says of him that he's a man detestable in every way it was possible to be detestable.
Suetonius is very good at this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so in modern terms, according to Suetonius, Nero's father basically kind of kills a waiter during a Bullingdon Club style drinking game.
We've all done that.
He knocks down a child while driving a sports car.
Okay, that's bad.
He maims a businessman in a pub brawl. He defrauds a bank. He cheats a sports star, and then as Minister for Sport, he legislates against cheating sports stars. So that's what he would be in a kind of modern situation. So he's seen as a kind of monstrous, appalling person.
Yeah.
How far back, to what extent this is kind of backdated because people want to blacken Nero's reputation, we don't really know. But there is a sense that the Ahene the family that Nero's descended from, are seen as kind of arrogant and aggressive, and that then fuses with Agrippina's perceived kind of virago-esque qualities, means that people are able to cast Nero as someone who was kind of rotten right from the beginning.
Let me just interrupt you here, because obviously Nero and his mother raises the... Now, I had Suetonius, I think, when I was about 11 or 12, and I can remember reading it at my grandparents' house and thinking...
Lots of asterisks.
And thinking, well, I'm getting away with this. But if this was anything but a Penguin classic, it would be in the bin, and I'd be thrown out in the cold in deep disgrace. Because aren't the scenes... I'm trying to remember this, but aren't the scenes where he and his mum are in a litter, and he gets out and there's kind of semen stains all over his clothes because he and his mum have been up to no good. So this stuff is all, this is all just totally invented, right? This is just the formula of a kind of Roman invective. You're having incest, and because it's almost sort of the kind of thing that the Ptolemies would have done, I suppose.
Well, essentially Nero, when he becomes emperor, and there is, of course, inevitably a rumor that Claudius is poisoned. He's supposed to have been poisoned with mushrooms, and it's absolutely the convention that powerful women go around poisoning people. So this is the stuff that's told about Livia, Augustus's wife, and it's told about Agrippina as well.
But they probably didn't. Is that your claim? Well, basically,
we don't know. How do we know? We can't know. There are certain things we just have to accept. We don't know.
You've written books about this. If you don't know, nobody does.
What I know is that we don't know. We don't know.
Very
disappointing. But what I also know is that these rumors were believed, and they were believed because the power politics in the Augustan house was incredibly carnivorous. And perhaps, if you wanted to argue that Agrippina had poisoned Claudius, it's because young Britannicus is about to come of age. And so therefore, if Nero is going to become emperor, she needs to get him in position very quickly. And it's possible that, Nero is aware of the debt that he owes his mother, that without her, he simply wouldn't be in the position that he is. And to begin with, there are all kinds of coins, all kinds of statues, all kinds of propaganda proclaiming the amity between mother and son. As the years go by, so Agrippina starts to vanish from the coins and from the statues, until by the end, Nero is incredibly keen to get rid of her. And I think that there is one of the things that runs throughout the stories that are told about Nero, and I think must kind of be true to his character, is a fondness for shocking, a kind of fondness for pushing for pushing things to the extreme. And so there's a kind of he's a kind of cross between Trump and Chris Morris.
Right. Okay. So he'd have his own Channel 4 kind of semi-satirical show.
He enjoys shocking people and kind of trampling on the expectations of the political elites. But at the same time, he's very shrewd and the kind of cruel quality to his very sharp, intelligent, satirical mind. And so one of the things that he does is, I think he's supposed to have kept a woman who looks like his mother, and he kind of, fondles her and caresses her. And obviously this is intended to be completely shocking. And then in due course, he murders her. And the stories that are told about the process of murder are very, very kind of flamboyant and baroque. So he's meant to have arranged for her bedroom to fall in on her. He kind of sets in a roof that you pull a lever and it falls down and crushes her. That doesn't work.
That's very Bond villain.
It's very, very Bond villain. And even more Bond villain, he gives her a yacht that goes out into the Bay of Naples. Again, they pull a lever, it disintegrates.
Oh, yeah,
but Agrippina can swim. So she comes to the shore. And so Nero, fed up by this point, just sends a posse of guards who kind of stab her to death. Now, it's not, I think, shocking that a member of the Augustan house would kill another member of his house. There's quite a lot of this going on, but it's done discreetly.
Yeah, this is so theatrical, isn't it?
This is so theatrical. It's so kind of public. And when Nero has finished it, she's murdered on the Bay of Naples. He returns to Rome, and it's like he's celebrating a triumph when he goes into Rome. And when in due course he takes to the stage, which is again kind of shocking thing for a Roman to do, let alone an emperor, because actors, the Romans regard actors as being beyond, absolutely the kind of the lowest of the low. They're on a level with prostitutes and madams and all kinds of things like that. So for Nero to do that is very shocking. But among the roles that he plays are figures from Greek tragedy who are famous for having killed their mothers. And I suppose the most famous is Orestes, who is the son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra kills Agamemnon, the returning king from the Trojan War. And Orestes is then told by the Delphic oracle to kill his mother. And so he's torn between his natural love as a son and the dictates of the god, and goes ahead and does it. And gets pursued by the furies of these kind of terrifying gods. But he's done it essentially because the gods called him to do it. And so Nero is casting his murder of his mother in that kind of way. And basically what Nero is doing is he is casting himself as the equivalent of a hero from Greek tragedy. So a hero, it's not quite the meaning that it has for us. A hero is someone who stands between humans and gods, and who perform outsized deeds and do terrible things, and terrible things are done to them. And Nero basically is using all the resources of drama and of song and of his own life to portray himself as someone sprung from the ancient world of Greek tragedy. And that is what makes him so disorienting and destabilizing, I think, is because we talk about him being, what's the reality behind the myth? Well, the reality behind the myth is that he's creating the myth.
But okay, Tom, all of this raises so many interesting questions because obviously he's a performer, he's a populist and all this stuff. But the one thing that interests me as somebody who does more modern history is you and people who write about Nero are basing this on, how many written sources are there? 3? 4, 5?
No, it's more than that. And you've got the evidence. You've got the evidence of coins and of archaeology.
Yeah, but put the coins on one side. The coins give you something, but some of the stories, for example, the death of Agrippina and the yacht, the yacht falling apart, or his carry on with eunuchs, or kicking his wife to death, or the other sort of canonical things that we know about him, they are often based on a couple of sources, aren't they? At heart. And how far do you, when you're writing this, because you've obviously written about Nero. You love Nero. And you've written about it with such sort of enthusiasm and brio. But how much, when you're writing it, do you think to yourself, well, yeah, this could well be bollocks.
Yeah,
but I'm going to tell the story anyway.
It's a constant challenge. And the more grotesque the stories, the more the challenge is there. But I think that with Nero, there is extraneous evidence that, in a sense, Nero is kind of writing scripts for himself and creating stage sets for himself that mean that, in a sense, a lot of the kind of more hostile stories that are told about him are distorted refractions of things that he himself was trying to do. Okay. So essentially what you have to do is to look at the entire mass of the evidence. And that goes beyond the simply textual evidence, and essentially try and work out, well, are these stories simply fantasy? Or are they true and was he mad? Or are they refractions of something that might conceivably come from Nero himself? And if we can understand what it is that he's doing, perhaps we can then get a sense of what he's all about.
And was he mad, Tom?
No, he's not mad. He's a man of ferocious creative ability and talent.
Yeah, he reminds me of the Joker. The Joker in the Heath Ledger iteration.
Well, when I was translating the life of Suetonius, he describes how Nero, as a young man, would go out into the streets and he'd kind of disguise himself as a slave and just go out and kind of beat people up and enjoy it. And I did kind of have this image of perhaps of casting Seneca as a Batman figure. Right. Roaming the streets of Rome, fighting. But yes, I think that the Joker would be the closest analogy in contemporary culture to kind of what Nero is doing. He is malevolent, I think, and sinister, but also incredibly charismatic and incredibly creative. And the thing that the Christopher Biggins portrayal of him in I, Claudius, and indeed in the Heineken advert, if you remember.
I don't remember.
I kind of looked that up. It's really, Christopher Biggins as Nero he's sentenced so many gladiators to death that he can't move his thumb. So they bring on a glass of Heineken and he drinks it, and then he's able to start sentencing gladiators to death again. But also with Peter Ustinov in Quo Vadis, that he's this kind of fat comic. He's kind of murderous Billy Bunter.
Right.
Your great love. That's untrue, I think. I think Nero is not a kind of ridiculous figure. And I think also that the stories that get told about him, that he was a terrible singer, that he was a terrible actor, that he was a terrible charioteer, these are not true either. He was clearly very proficient at all of them. Because to do all of them required an absolute kind of baseline of talent. And so the parallel would be, imagine a world leader today starring in, an Oscar-winning Hollywood film, headlining at Glastonbury,
right,
competing in Formula One.
Yeah,
even the most kind of brutal autocrat, to do that, you'd have to have a certain baseline of talent to get away with it, because we know that although there were people who did kind of sneer at this, there were also people who regarded Nero with great admiration for what he had done. And when Nero dies and kind of, Elvis-style impersonators pop up all over the place after he's dead, which in itself is an indication that there was kind of huge degree of popularity. What marks them out is that they have immense musical proficiency. So he's I think, a very, very talented man. And that's kind of what makes him frightening.
Brilliant. Well, let's take a break here, and then we can come back. We can set Rome on fire, talk about the Christians, and do lots of questions, because we have tons of questions to get through.
Yeah.
All right. See you in a second. Welcome back to The Rest is History. Tom Holland is pronouncing on Nero, one of his favourite subjects, and I am just really along for the ride. We have got lots of questions, Tom, and I think we should just go straight in, because that way we can cover the subjects we haven't already done. So Ben Crowden, he says, what happened to Britannicus? So this is Claudius's son, who you might say ought to have been emperor. Maybe you can say whether you think Britannicus was robbed or whatever, but what happened to him? Did Nero kill him? And how different might things have been if he'd ascended to the throne? And that raises an interesting question about how much Nero's bad behaviour is actually a consequence of the role rather than the man, whether it was, the nature of the princeps meant that, young men behaved badly when they had that sort of authority. Anyway, go ahead, Britannicus.
Well, so Britannicus, after Nero has become emperor, he dies, supposedly of food poisoning at a banquet. And inevitably anyone in the Julio Claudia family who dies of food poisoning at a banquet, there are suspicions that poison has operated. And there's no question the relations between Nero and Britannicus don't seem to have been great. Britannicus kept calling Nero Ahenobarbus after his, which was no longer his name because he'd been adopted by Claudius. So Nero took that as a slight. There's a very unpleasant story that Nero sodomizes him. Not because he particularly wanted to, but as a way of kind of establishing his dominance and humiliating Britannicus. So that's the kind of unpleasant story. And then the story about the poisoning is that he employs this specialist called Lucasta, who brews up poison, and it's kind of too slow operating. And Nero says, make it more powerful. And they try it out on a pig, and the pig immediately dies. And so Nero says, that's great. And Britannicus dies, and gets burned the next day on a pyre, and gets kind of rushed off to, gets buried very fast. And Nero's so thrilled that he basically sets Lucasta up as a kind of poisoning tutor. So he supposedly sends people off to study with Lucasta. I mean, all of this is, this.
Do you think all of this is?
Yeah, this is all. But Britannicus is in the way. He dies. I would say that there was motive and opportunity there. So,
but you could argue, couldn't you? I mean, going back to my point about the nature of the role, you could argue that Nero would have been mad to allow Britannicus to live. That actually,
absolutely,
it's sort of bad luck, but Britannicus has to go.
He's kind of in the way. Also, a wonderful detail in Suetonius that Nero kills Britannicus less because he's a threat, actually, than because he has a better singing voice than Nero. So again, that's kind of classic example of the way that,
it's very Noel and Liam Gallagher, that particular dynamic, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, so that's Britannicus. Now let's move on to a crucial question. David Banks, was Nero the most powerful ginger of all time? I think it's ginger. I'm assuming that's not a misprint, and he hasn't written singer.
No, I think it's ginger. Yeah, and we've got one from Felicity Harrington, haven't we?
Oh, yes. Is the hair colour based on evidence from statues or descriptions in documents, or merely because prejudice that people assume that this kind of bad behaviour could only come from a ginger? I don't know, Tom. Was Nero definitely ginger-haired?
Well, so it comes from, again, his family name, Henobarbus, which basically means bronze beard. And this is an ancient legend that the ancestor of the Henobarbi is, he's coming back from, he's riding to Rome while a great battle is being fought. He doesn't know what the result of the battle is. Castor and Pollux, the divine twins, Gemini, appear to him and say that the Romans have won the battle. And then they stroke his beard, which turns bronze. So a kind of gingery. And so supposedly all the Henobarbi from that point on have a ginger beard. And so that's presumably why Nero is portrayed as having a ginger beard. Although actually Suetonius says that his hair was light blonde. So
all right. Yeah.
A bit of, we don't know.
Yeah. So he's more like we were doing the Game of Thrones podcast. We talked about Jack Gleeson, who was Joffrey. He's more Joffrey, isn't he? I mean, that's kind of that's how I imagine him, because Joffrey in Game of Thrones is this very sort of, and just his general demeanour. He's a sort of willful child who is cruel and capricious and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's kind of what Nero is.
I don't think he's on the Joffrey level.
You don't think he's as bad as that?
Well, I'll tell you. So one of the things about Nero is that he's actually very uxorious. So Joffrey, of course, I mean, he goes around killing everyone.
Yeah, but I mean, you say he's uxorious, but I mean, I imagine you're very uxorious, but you've never kicked your wife to death, which Nero did.
We don't know that Nero did. So Nero marries Claudius's daughter. So effectively, he's marrying his sister. You didn't, with your Ptolemies, you'd enjoy that.
Yeah.
He doesn't like Octavia. His first great love is a Syrian freedwoman called Acte, who he's passionately devoted to. Agrippina, one of the things that comes between him and Agrippina is Agrippina doesn't approve of this, doesn't want a freedwoman as a daughter-in-law. So
an ex-slave freedwoman.
An ex-slave, yeah. So Nero basically kind of splits up with her, but is always fond of her. And when Nero dies, it's Acte who buries him. He then falls in love with Poppaea Sabina, who we've talked about already in the eunuch episode.
Yeah.
But she's the most fashionable woman in Rome. She bathes in ass's milk. She has her own cosmetics range. She says, I want to die. I hope I die before I get old. Years before Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend did. And her wish comes true because she dies in childbirth. And the story is that Nero,
kicked her to death.
But we don't know that. We don't know that. How can we know that? Again, it's the kind of malevolent story that would be told about him by his enemies. But we know that Nero was devoted to her, because he deifies her. He lavishes a year's worth of incense from Arabia at her funeral. And of course, he constructs a kind of sterile, maimed, living model of her in the form of this freedman, this boy who looks exactly like her.
This is Sporus, right?
Yes, and we haven't had any genital mutilation in this episode yet. So here it comes. So the genitals and penis get removed, and Nero offers money for someone who could make him a real woman. So properly make him a woman, implant a uterus and so on. Can't do that. But to the degree that he can, he recreates Poppaea. And he does this clearly because he's...
That's a very strange... Tom, I think this is a pretty strange definition of uxorious behaviour. I mean, it's unusual behaviour even for a Roman emperor, right?
It's a Neronian form of displaying his passion for his dead wife.
Yes.
And then he marries another woman, Statilia Messalina, who is like Poppaea, witty, sophisticated, aristocratic, clearly very much Nero's type. And, he stays true to her, even though he's also simultaneously married this kind of ersatz Poppaea.
So he's married to this eunuch as well. I mean, that's staying true. It's a very loose description of staying.
I know. It's not. It's
This may be South London morality, Tom, but you wouldn't get away with this in Chipping Norton.
It's a Neronian form of being faithful to these three women. So Acte, Poppaea, and Statilia Messalina. He's essentially devoted to the three of them. I can't quite remember how we got onto that. But anyway, basically I'm saying he's not as bad as he seemed, but the way in which he shows his good behaviour is still terrifying.
Conventional loving husband. I think we've got him nailed down. All right, let's move on. Stephen Clark, a friend of the show, has a question. Who or what caused the Great Fire of Rome? Whom did Nero blame for it? And if I can add a twist, how is it that Nero himself came to be blamed for it and that everybody thinks he fiddled while Rome burned? Obviously, they didn't even have fiddles. So it's not...
No, it's the liar. So it's talking about the lie.
But that's all rubbish, isn't it? He didn't play while Rome burned.
Well, so the stories are that Nero sets fire to Rome, basically because he's a kind of pyromaniacal Le Corbusier. He doesn't like Rome's architecture. He finds its kind of narrow, winding streets upsetting. He wants something more modern and clean. So he's a kind of murderous 1950s town planner.
Yeah, yes. He's the man who made Brasilia.
Yes. So that's the story. And the further story is that he treats burning Rome as a kind of backdrop to sing about the fall of Troy. Is this true? Or probably not. I mean, I would say kind of 80% not. Yeah. Rome is a tinderbox. It's largely made of wood. There are all kinds of flammable materials stored everywhere. It rages for 9 days. It incinerates much of the city. Nero is not there when it burns down. He comes rushing back. As I've said, he's very proficient at trying to fight it. He basically behaves responsibly and well. And he does indeed rebuild Rome in kind of, I guess Le Corbusier would be the way. I mean, perhaps the kind of parallel.
And so traditionalists think traditionalists blame him, do they? Is that how it works?
Well, but he then goes on to build this kind of golden house, which is this huge, it's not just the house itself, which is stunning, but he builds essentially the equivalent of a country state in the middle of Rome. So again, there's a kind of hint there as to Nero's character that he loves paradox and shock. Nothing could be more paradoxical, nothing could be more shocking than to create a country estate in the middle of the most crowded city in the world. And of course, this infuriates people whose property's been lost. Senators have lost property. Yeah. Large numbers of the poor have lost their property. And to see Nero building this estate is, of course, it kind of provokes resentment. But pretty much all our sources, apart from Tacitus, says that Nero did start the fire. They essentially say he starts the fire. Suetonius says because he wants to make Rome look more beautiful. Others because he wants to build the house. Is it credible? I think not. But I think there is. It's what I would say about Nero's character is that it's not entirely proven that he didn't start it.
So he could have done it.
He could have done.
Yeah.
It's not. It's kind of within the bounds, I think, of the kind of personality that Nero seems to have had.
Sort of Joker style,
conceivably have done it. But of course, the fire is also notorious because it's the first entry of Christians.
Right. So is that him? He blames the Christians, or is that just generally in the air and he picks up on it, or he reflects it, or whatever?
So the story of Nero blaming the Christians and having them arrested and then having them put to death in very, very kind of typically Neronian manner. They are soaked in pitch, they are crucified, then they're set on fire so that they serve as torches. Nero kind of wanders around dressed as a charioteer looking at them, so it's kind of he's playing the role of the sun. He's visiting on them a kind of the punishment that is appropriate to arsonists. There's a huge amount about this passage that is unclear. It's unclear why the Christians are being accused of it. It's unclear exactly how it is that Nero has even become aware of their existence.
Because they must be so tiny at this point, are they, in Rome?
And also it
can't be many of them.
It is the only mention of Christians being blamed for this that we get in any of the sources, and overtly. And so there has a guy called Brent Shaw, a scholar called Brent Shaw, has posited that perhaps it didn't even happen. I mean, I think that really requires you to manipulate the evidence severely. But there are kind of mysterious qualities to it. And it's because of that. I mean, I think that clearly Nero did target the Christians, I guess, because they were kind of weird, sinister cultists. Nobody knew anything about them, but they were convenient. Presumably they had a kind of apocalyptic element. They were subversives. They were to hand. And so he blames them.
And then that gets reflected in the Book of Revelation, doesn't it? So this is Luke Wilson's question. Do you think his name fits the number of a man 666 in the Book of Revelation, 13:18, when written in the Hebrew form, Nero
Keza.
I don't know if I'm saying that right. So what's going on there, Tom? I don't understand any of this. I'm completely out of my depth.
So the number of the beast is 666.
Yeah.
And applying the prism of Hebrew numerology, that transliterates into Neron Caesar. And so...
Does it really, or is this Dan Brown talking?
No, absolutely it does. This has been recognized right from the beginning.
Okay.
So essentially Nero is the beast. And it's not just it's not just in the Book of Revelation that Nero appears. So there's a late first century text called the Ascension of Isaiah, which has a kind of wonderful description of Nero as Beliar, and it goes, Beliar, the great ruler, the king of this world, will descend, who hath ruled it since it came into being. Yea, he will descend from his firmament in the likeness of a man, a lawless king, the slayer of his mother. So that's casting Nero
that's good.
as a literally cosmic figure of evil. And, that again, in a way, is a kind of tribute to Nero's charisma. You have to be a figure of incredible potency, I think.
Yeah.
To convincingly be cast as the beast or the devil or the great ruler, the king of this world, in contrast to God who rules eternity.
I don't want to prejudge anybody, but I don't think Keir Starmer's ever going to be described as the beast, is he?
No. But I mean, even Putin or Trump, I mean, they're just not on that level. They're not able to correspond to that. Although there is a kind of interesting, again, a kind of counterpoint to this, because wherever you get people saying Nero is a monster, you also get other people who kind of love him. And a very unexpected group of people who really do like Nero are the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century rabbis who claim that Nero didn't commit suicide, that he faked his own death, that he went to Judea and he converted to Judaism. And he fathered a long line of rabbis whose writings are part of the Talmud. So that's a kind of counterpoint to the Christian perspective on Nero.
I would love it if that were true, Tom. That would be
it's a great story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And again, kind of so brilliantly unexpected. And the thing is that of course the 1st century AD, you've got this incredible swirl of prophetic stuff. You've got the death of Jesus. You've got the burning of the temple. In the Judean revolt, which breaks out under Nero. And you've got all these prophecies that talk about how a king is going to rule the world coming out of Judea, which obviously feeds into Christianity. Jews are obsessed by it. It helps to inspire the Jewish revolt. But it does also feed into the posthumous reputation of Nero, and he gets bundled into these prophecies. And there are lots and lots of people who say that, just as Christians say that Jesus will come again, there are lots of people who say that Nero will come again. And lots say that he will come rather in the form of the devil, that he will bring chaos and disaster to the world. But there are also those who say that he will come and he will bring an age of justice and peace.
Well, let's get on to Nero's exit. So we had a good question from Jeff Costello about his last words, which I want to ask in a second. But just before that, you've presented a version of Nero that's I think a lot of historians would probably go along with. That he's the showman and the performer and a populist and all these things, and that he's obviously not a madman, and he's not a kind of just a completely deranged sadist. And it's easy to see why the crowds, who are probably sick of senators talking about, probity and Roman rigor and stuff. They're probably sick of all that, and they love a bit of gladiatorial action and watching people being set alight and free bread from Egypt or whatever.
Well, actually interesting. I mean, Tacitus does say that the sufferings of the Christians are so great that people do slightly turn against Nero.
Well, that's
kind of interesting. Yeah.
But my question is, what goes wrong? why does anyone turn against him? Why does it all, why do people, when the Julio Claudians have been there now for 5 emperors, what is it that Nero does that is sufficiently shocking to turn senatorial opinion so dramatically against the entire dynasty? Because he is the end of the whole dynasty, isn't he? I mean, it's not just his reign, it's the whole story comes to a crashing conclusion in that year of, year of 4 emperors when he gets kicked out.
Yeah. Well, so there have been escalating conspiracies against him. The most notorious is one that revolves around a guy called Piso. And this is the one that drags down Seneca. So Seneca gets implicated in that and essentially gets told to commit suicide, which he dutifully does. Nero then goes on this tour of Greece where he races in the Olympic Games with his 10-horse chariot. Most people only have 2 or 4. So
right.
I mean, and people always laugh at this because he crashes and has to be given a new chariot and he doesn't complete the race, but he still wins first prize. But the thing is, I mean, it takes courage to do that. It would take courage to compete in, someone who isn't a professional Formula One driver to compete at Monaco or whatever. So while Nero's away, further rumours of conspiracy start to brew. The following year, news comes of an open rebellion in Gaul. Then another open rebellion in Spain, led by the 70-year-old martinet called Galba. And Nero, there are all kinds of stories that he says that he's going to go and play the lyre to the rebellious soldiers, and they will all burst into tears, and then they'll, that's how he's going to fight them. But again, this is counterpointed to he's actually clearly quite energetic in his response. He musters what troops he can. He sends them north to combat the revolt in Gaul, and then all kinds of rumours reach him that basically these troops are turning against him, that the whole thing is falling to pieces. And the commander of the Praetorians, who's, an absolute shit, even by Nero standards, basically turns on Nero, I think because he sees a kind of outside chance that he might be able to grab the empire for himself. So Nero suddenly finds that he doesn't have any troops in Rome, and he is intending to flee to Alexandria, where he'd be very popular. Muster troops there, but then he changes his mind. He flees Rome. He ends up in a villa on the outskirts of Rome, and the news is brought to him that the Senate have declared him a public enemy and that he's going to be sentenced to a horrible death when he gets found, and so he commits suicide. But
what has he done to provoke these conspiracies, Tom? I mean, why does the guy in Gaul, or Spain rather, Galba, why do he and are they not being paid? Is there some policy that's outraged them, or?
I think it's, it's Nero enjoys shock, and his entire reign has been a kind of riff on offending the sensibilities of the very powerful.
And he's just pushed them too far.
I think he's pushed them too far. It coincides with a period of famine in Rome, so that's bad luck for him.
Yeah.
And so the sense that both senatorial and popular support for him is wobbling give people, people are always predatory, the chance to strike.
Yeah. And now that brings us to Jeff's question, finally. Were his last words really, "A great artist dies with me," or variations thereof?
Well, that's what Suetonius says. Well, Suetonius says that his last words are "Qualis artifex perio." And so that's traditionally translated as "what an artist dies with me." But there's, I think, very convincingly, a scholar called Edward Champlin, who's written the best book on Nero, argues, I think, very convincingly that artifex actually means a kind of artisan, a workman who's employed to do building work. And essentially that's what Nero is doing in the kind of this rubble-strewn house, is that he's been reduced to this level. That's what he's saying. He's saying, he was a great artist, but now look at me, I've just become a stagehand. So it's almost the opposite of what people traditionally think he said. And, in a sense, that is the kind of, I guess, for Nero, it's the horror, is that in the end, he doesn't have a death that he feels would be appropriate to him. He doesn't go out in the kind of blaze of tragic glory. It's rather pathetic, even pathetic. And there's a horrible description in Suetonius' account that his when after he's committed suicide, gets a free man to help him slit his own throat. The blood pumps out. Centurion comes galloping in, tries to staunch the flow with a towel, but it's too late. And we're told that his eyes bulged horribly.
Oh, God, that's no way to go, is it? So 2 last questions. One is about succession. So Nero's dead. Why is it such a shambles to sort out who comes next? Why has nobody agreed? Because you have Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian.
Yeah.
And why is that such a kind of mess? Why haven't all the opposition agreed on? I mean, why have they got no candidate?
Because people have assumed that a descendant of Augustus should rule. And when Nero dies, and effectively he's the last of the descendants of Augustus, all the others have been killed or died. All kinds of portents are seen. Trees planted by Livia wither and perish. There's a cypress tree in the forum that its roots spread all the way to, across the forum, and that dies as well. So all these kind of portents are seen that something terrible has happened. And so the question is, can you have rule by a Caesar if there are no longer any Caesars? And in a way, Claudius has blazed the trail because he wasn't a Caesar, but he's been voted the name of Caesar as a kind of title by the Senate. And so effectively, this is where the idea that the name Caesar, is shorthand for an emperor rather than a family name comes in.
Yeah.
But obviously, if you don't have to have a descendant of Augustus ruling the world, then basically anyone can become Caesar. And that's the kind of the great discovery. And that's why Nero dies in 68 and the year 69 is known as the year of the 4 emperors, because you have 4 people all kind of scrambling after it. It's very Game of Thrones.
Why don't they just restore the Republic? Or is that just not possible now that they're running a big empire?
It's kind of like, why don't we go back to the political system of Queen Victoria? I mean, it's just, it's just impossible.
Yeah.
So effectively you need an emperor at the head. And what's interesting about the year of the 4 emperors, there are those 4 emperors, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, Vespasian. 2 of those emperors are close associates of Nero. Otho, although he'd been exiled effectively to go and rule Portugal, had been, he'd been kind of Nero's chief friend in the equivalent of the Bullingdon Club.
Right.
And had actually at one point been married to Poppaea.
So he's George Osborne to Nero's David Cameron.
Yes, exactly. And so when he comes back, he plays the Nero card. He puts up Nero statues. He pays for the Golden House to continue to be developed. Vitellius also is.
He's very fat, isn't he?
He's very fat, but he's very, he likes Nero. He casts himself as the heir of Nero. And it's only because ultimately the guy who wins, Vespasian, is, a rough-hewn, well, kind of like you, Dominic. He's a true-born son of the soil.
In my Cameron analogy, he's kind of
figure of middle Italy.
He's kind of Eric Pickles.
He's an Eric Pickles guy, yes. And the joke is always that he looks like he's straining to have a shit. So,
right.
Which is very not Nero.
It's a perfect analogy then, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically, he succeeds in establishing a dynasty. So for the first time, an emperor gets succeeded not by 1 but by 2 sons. Titus and Domitian,
yeah.
And this dynasty, the Flavians, after Vespasian's family name, their legitimacy depends on blackening Nero's name, and
right.
so that ensures that basically Nero will be regarded as a monster. But there is evidence from across the empire, not just in the immediate aftermath of Nero's death, but for centuries after, that Nero is remembered, in various communities across the empire very positively.
And so is it because of Christianity then that Nero becomes, he's probably the one emperor that most people, if you stopped them in the street and said, name a Roman emperor, I'm guessing, apart from Julius Caesar, obviously wasn't a Roman emperor.
Yeah.
Nero is probably the one that would get name checked the most. Is that because of Christianity, do you think? Because he's the beast and all this stuff?
I think that fuses with the, with the legacy of the 2 great accounts of Nero's reign that survives, Tacitus and Suetonius, both of whom they often give kind of different accounts of what you can see as basically the same kind of incidents, but they're clearly coming from the same page. And so there's to that extent, there's a kind of coherent image of Nero, which then fuses with the Christian portrayal of him as literally diabolical to create an image of him as the ultimate Roman emperor. And so there's a fantastic line in the Marquis de Sade's horrible novel Juliet, Juliet's this kind of terrifying murderess. And her tutor in evil is this woman called Cleo. And she says of Nero, "Oh, Nero, I will always honour your memory. Were you still alive, I would worship you. You will be forever my ideal and my god." And so the Marquis de Sade is enshrined Nero as the kind of the great idol. But as I've said throughout, I think that to have that kind of notoriety, you have to have a kind of charisma.
Yeah.
There have been lots of kind of terrible kings and emperors who've done terrible things, but they don't have this kind of, it is a kind of glamour. I mean, his notoriety is glamorous.
The glamour of evil, though, isn't it? I mean, isn't that basically why people, and of performance, I suppose, is that
it's
Joker
a performative
element.
Evil, yeah. But I think, I can't think of a major ruler whose artistic sensibility was more creative than Nero's. And
I think love Nero.
I think in a way,
it's unbelievable.
That's why his reputation blazes in the way that it does.
Yeah,
2,000 years after his death.
Well, you think he's uxorious, so
I think he is.
Your standards are
the most charismatic, uxorious ruler.
Well, there you go. The great man has spoken. Tom Holland has proclaimed his verdict, and that's Nero. So, Tom, we'll be back later in the week with
the history of France.
Oh yeah, Paris.
So we mentioned Nero as Haussmann, but we will actually be talking about the real Haussmann.
Yeah, very good. Paris with Agnès Poirier.
That's right.
And the World Cup.
And of course the World Cup of Gods. So yes, you'll be listening to this if you get it immediately on Monday, and the World Cup of Gods will be going on
in full
today
swing,
and tomorrow and all the way up to Thursday. And then
Tom and I don't know. We don't know who'll have been knocked out.
We don't even know what the draw is at this point.
No, it's that excitement, isn't it? Before the narrative is set in stone. So dramatic.
That's what sport's all about.
Yeah, it is.
So exciting.
I should say, if you've got absolutely no idea what we're talking about, and fair enough, if you go to our Twitter accounts or at The Rest History online, then you'll find out all about the World Cup of Gods and how you can vote. And on that bombshell, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.